Thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here today. It's our pleasure to share some of the research we did with the Community Cultural Wealth research team. And I know how to make this work, so it's not a problem. Yes. And so, as Sarah said, I'm Julie Stanton, and I was the PI on an NSF grant that funded the work that we're going to talk about today.
And I'm Birook Mekonnen. I was a former co-researcher on the NSF study. And a little bit about my current job. I am a federal government employee at the United States Public Health Service. And so I'm legally obligated to tell you I'm not in my official capacity. So I work as an emergency management specialist within public health sector.
Yeah, so here we have outlined our plan for today and our time together in the seminar. What we're going to do is start by introducing community cultural wealth and the way we did the work, which is called participatory action research. Then we're going to share the results of our study with a focus on the forms of community cultural wealth that Black students in our study use as part of their success in their pathways. And I do want to promote the workshop that we're going to offer after lunch, because we'll take the knowledge from today's seminar and utilize it so that you can take this to your classrooms and other settings to support students at Oakland University. Throughout our seminar, we'll have some opportunities for interaction, so we look forward to your participation. So to get started, I'll mention that our group uses the term Black to refer to individuals from the African diaspora, including those who identify as African American. And when we think about the excellence of Black scientists, we know that this exists because they were able to persist in science majors despite many barriers, including the many ways in which societal systems have failed to serve Black students. Yet despite their ability to persist, they're still underrepresented in science fields, and this is something that we want to address as a group. And in order to support the success of Black science majors, what we want to do is think about their mechanisms of success, because a lot of the research in the literature focuses on characterizing all of the barriers and all of the challenges. And while we want to take a realistic approach and understand the experiences that students have, if we want to support persistence, we need to have a new approach. And the approach that our group uses is called anti-deficit achievement approach, which was first characterized by Dr. Sean Harper. So Dr. Sean Harper developed this framework, and you may have heard of it more recently as an asset-based approach. And this focuses on success of students rather than failure. So we can look and say, Dr. Sean Harper would encourage us to reverse deficit-oriented questions such as, why do so many Black students leave science majors? And reframe them as achievement-oriented questions, such as, why do Black students persist in science despite all known barriers? And so we take this anti-deficit achievement approach, and we use a framework called community cultural wealth, which was really described by Dr. Tara Yasso, who's now at UC Riverside. And what she wanted to do was focus on the assets that students of color and their families can use to survive and resist various forms of oppression they may encounter. And community cultural wealth really challenges us to change our focus and not think about students of color and their families as people to blame for inequities in education that they are not responsible for. So when we think about community cultural wealth, we're thinking about the unique strengths that students possess already without any help from us, these unique strengths that they bring to their education. And this consists of capital, which is not referring to money. We're thinking about non-financial assets, such as knowledge, skills, abilities, and contacts. So there's 6 forms of capital, and throughout today's presentation, we'll go through each one with a definition and examples from our research. For right now, I want to share with you one form of capital called aspirational capital, which refers to a student's ability to maintain hopes and dreams for the future, even in the face of real or perceived barriers. And when you look at these forms of capital, and as we explore them today, one thing to keep in mind is that they're not discrete categories. You may find that different forms of capital actually overlap. But the point that's really important for me to underscore today is that community cultural wealth can be a part of student success, but it often goes unrecognized. And because these strengths often go unrecognized, I want us to pause for a moment and think about a time where for each of us, our strengths went unrecognized and how it felt to have those innate abilities overlooked. And I know you didn't come here this morning thinking you would be reflecting on when you were last unrecognized. So I'll give you an example to get us started. When I first came to the University of Georgia, I was asked to be in charge of a large undergraduate research summer program. And I had done this work before at my previous institution, so I was excited to continue that work. But as the summer became closer, many of my senior colleagues started following up on me about organizational pieces that I had actually taken care of months before. And I felt frustrated because if they asked me to be in charge of a program, why did they not trust me to carry out all the stages involved? So I'm going to give you just a moment for quiet reflection and think about a time when your strengths that you brought to the table were not recognized and how that made you feel. Oftentimes we're seeing cases like the one you shared, and thank you for that, where there's someone questioning the source of the information, right? You had provided this rich information so important for accreditation, but because it wasn't coming from the dean's office, there was this idea that maybe it wasn't as critical as it was. And then you gave them the opportunity to find out how critical that was, right? So I want you all to keep that in mind, ideas shared and unshared, that for our students, they're bringing this wealth to our classrooms and we're often overlooking it and how that could make them feel.
Sorry. So we did our research in collaboration with our listed team members there to investigate the community cultural wealth of Black science majors. We posed, to investigate this research, we posed 2 research questions. They were primarily to identify and characterize the community cultural wealth, CCW, of our Black science majors. And then secondary goal was to explore the context our students are succeeding in at a predominantly white institution or PWI. So to investigate these 2 goals, we posed 2 research questions, which is what is the racial climate that our students experience at a PWI? And then what are the forms of capital that we saw a little bit of example of a bit earlier that our students utilize to succeed and persist in their majors at a PWI? So the rationale here, what we can gain from this knowledge of study is to, first thing is to inform the actions that build upon the existing strength that our students have and improve their learning environments at our school. And then also it's to promote the research approach that we spoke about earlier for studying those experiences of our racially minoritized students. And an example of this critical research approach is PAR, Participatory Action Research. And what PAR is, it's a partnership between the researchers and those research study participants, those people from marginalized groups that are being studied. And this is done in recognition of their critical expertise. So in our study, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, that was our PAR team in 2018, where we had successful Black science majors studying other successful Black science majors. An additional, one of PAR's additional goal is to collaborate on research and also promote a social change of an actual plan as the end goal. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the workshop. So this slide is the content for our study participants. All to be included in our study, all participants met the major criterion of persisting into their final year, their senior year in their respective science major. We had about 34 senior Black science majors. There was also an additional criteria of meeting one or more of the following criteria, which was a cumulative GPA of 3.0 or receive an A grade in science course or the participation engagement in an undergraduate research or a science-related organization. For data collection, we utilized two semi-structured interviews conducted, one in the fall semester, and then the second interview conducted in the spring semester of their final year. And we utilized a card elicitation activity in the spring semester, in spring. And we encouraged, this was done because we encouraged the students, sorry.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's back. It's back.
Sorry about that. So we were talking about the card elicitation activity conducted in the spring semester. And this card deck you see here is an example of the aspirational capital deck. And the ideas on those cards was such as surpassing apparent success, helping other minorities succeed, that was within the deck, were ideas participants can select and discuss with the interviewer. And these ideas was ideas that was collected on in the first semester interview, right? And the reason we utilize card elicitation activity, not advancing my slides, so I'll use the manual. Is that community cultural wealth goes often unrecognized by the students themselves. So it's really an opportunity for the students to discuss, and it's also an opportunity for the interviewer to elicit that experience, those strengths, and their experiences that they're using to succeed in their science major. This slide is the content analysis schematic that shows how we conducted our data analysis post data collection. So we start with on the top left, reading the interview transcripts with the community cultural wealth in mind, framework in mind. And then we utilize that to identify the data that address each of our posed to research questions. And then afterwards, we were able to label segments of the data using codes to develop a code book, and then utilize that code book to label the data, right? So this is an iterative process to develop and finalize a code book in which afterwards we coded all the transcripts and summarizing the larger data. So after that content analysis, we then moved on to thematic analysis, where we're able to see larger groups and larger themes within the larger data set. Okay. So I'll hand off back to Julie. I think I can advance it for you.
So now I'm going to share some of the results of our study. And I do want to mention that these results were collected at one institution, so they may not be generalizable to other settings. However, I will tell you that our team has since collected data at 3 other colleges and universities. So if we look at our first research question, what is the racial climate experienced by Black science majors at a PWI? We felt this was an essential question to ask because we need to understand the circumstances under which the students are succeeding. So we'll provide the answer to this question in some context. So one of the things the students in our study talked about is the lack of Black classmates in their science courses and how that resulted in a feeling of enormous pressure to represent their race well in the classroom. Because they realized that for some of their classmates, they may be one of the only Black students that that classmate interacted with. And Rachel, which is a pseudonym, is a participant who said, you can walk into one of your classes and be the only Black person in your class. I don't think anyone who is not Black will ever be able to understand that feeling. Another idea that came out from our participants' interviews was the idea that they frequently expressed a variety of racial microaggressions. And this was really troubling on many levels, but one of the most challenging for our participants was that they didn't always know the person's intention when they had done a racial microaggression. And so they felt like if the racism was overt, then they would know what to do, but when it was subtle, it was even more challenging in some ways. So they didn't know the intention, and just one example of racial microaggression would be when picking lab partners, the experience of consistently being picked last as a lab partner or for a small group. So Helen said, I notice a lot of times when I go to places, some people just assume I have to be a first generation college student. My grandparents went to college. Now, what was less common for our students were experiences that they described with overt racism. When they did, they were often occurring downtown in Athens, Georgia, where our university is. But that downtown area is right across the street from campus. So for many students, it feels like an extension of our campus. Sometimes it also happened in the classroom. David said, I had someone cheat off me in one of my science classes, and then I saw him downtown and he called me the N-word walking past me. People will use you when they need you, and other than that, it's you are who you are, they are who they are, and they don't really want to interact with you. So I wanted to provide this background so that we have the context for this situation under which students are succeeding in. And now I'm going to move into talking about community cultural wealth that they use to succeed. One of the things that happens when kids first learn about community cultural wealth is there's this tendency to over-identify with the strengths. And for us to say, oh, I do that too. But I want you to keep in mind that the reasons and the degree to which the participants had to use these forms of community cultural wealth might be very different than other students. So I recognize we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but I'm not afraid. It's not my first rodeo. My first interview, I brought 2 laptops and back in the day, overhead slides, just in case there was a problem when I went on my first interview for a faculty position.
Did you email it to yourself as well?
I probably did. I did all the things. And so, what I'll do now is try to walk you through what you can't see, but what I'm excited about is that I hope you all will join us for the workshop this afternoon, in which you'll get a chance to see all of these written out again. So the first form of success we're going to talk about is aspirational capital. And I said earlier, that's the ability to maintain hopes and dreams for the future, even in the face of real and perceived barriers. Students in our study were very self-motivated. So this is an example of where I said it's easy to over-identify, and many of us in the room may feel very self-motivated. But I want to explain to you that our participants were saying, at a predominantly white institution, you have a feeling as a Black student that not a lot of people are on your side. Not a lot of people are rooting for your success. So if you don't feel within yourself this really strong desire to continue, that may be extinguished. And so they were very self-motivated in a way that wasn't about other people, it was about themselves. And they were also able to remain very confident despite setbacks that might cause other students to leave science majors. They just saw them as a chance where they might create a different opportunity. So this is a quote from Michelle, who said, I'm a very driven person. I think it's more innate. I don't really have someone I look up to and say, I want to be just like them. It's more like, I want to do this. I know what I need to do to be that future me. I was built for this. And Michelle was talking about the fact that she had never had a Black woman who was a science professor, and that was what she aspired to be. There wasn't a role model for her, but she didn't have to have one. She could see that in herself. So navigational capital is skills for navigating through higher education and social institutions, despite subtle and overt racism. And we found that participants, as I alluded to earlier, were able to navigate the system. And they learned this early in college. And it goes without saying that most of the colleges and universities in the United States were not built with students of color in mind. Therefore, there are a lot of structures and barriers they may encounter, but students in our study found ways to navigate through them. One of the things that related to their navigational capital was a willingness to ask for help. And this was exemplified by Susan, who said, if I don't understand the material, I'll either ask my professor or somebody in the class, even if I don't know them well. Sometimes I can tell they don't like me asking questions, but honestly, I have to pass. Another type of community cultural wealth was success through resistant capital, which is abilities gained from exercising agency to challenge inequality or oppressive messages. And there were a wide variety of ways in which students engaged in resistant capital. And some of them were to try to maintain a positive image of Black people, to resist the stereotypes that were being projected onto them. Also, to varying degrees, participants in our study were willing to discuss racism and confront it, hoping for the opportunity to educate the person with the assumption that the person just didn't understand what they were saying. But I will point out that not every participant felt like they could put forth the energy and risk their well-being to do this. But there were some that were willing. And so Jasmine said, I just try to make the fact that I'm here, make it count, because we weren't given this opportunity 50 years ago to be present. I'm here now, so I just want to make sure while I'm here, I leave my mark and do the best that I can, and I'm just educated because education is power. And Jasmine talked about not only wanting to be a faculty member, but to go on to higher administration, become a university president, to enact real change that she didn't yet see at her university. So another type of capital is familial capital, which is the ability to expand family boundaries, to include extended family and friends, and an overall commitment to the community well-being. So our participants were motivated to either start or maintain a family legacy when it came to not only their education, but their career paths. And they often talked about how they drew strength from parents, siblings, and friends that they consider family. So a real extension of the definition of family. Alexandra said, I'm a fourth generation African-American in college. I'm not gonna be the first PhD in my family, but I have a legacy to follow and I'm still making my own legacy. It's all motivational. Next, we have success through linguistic capital. So linguistic capital are skills gained from experiencing more than one language or communication style. And interestingly, in Dr. Teriyasu's original framework, linguistic capital extends to things like the arts, so dance, music, and so forth. When we saw our data, what we found is one of the types of linguistics capital was the participants' ability to code switch in response to anti-Black racism. And as you may know, code switching involves changing your speaking style based on the situation. I want to make clear that our participants saw code switching in a range of ways. Some of them simply saw it as a form of professionalism. Others felt like it was not a choice at all. It was something that was forced upon them in terms of assimilation, and it was something that they had to do to survive, but it made them feel like they couldn't be who they actually were in the science setting. Other participants leveraged the ability to speak two languages, so by being bilingual, they sometimes had a way to immediately connect with someone else in science, which was valuable to them. Mike talked about this idea of code switching and said code switching is something I've been doing for years, since probably middle school, just because that's the time that I started being in the gifted honors and AP classes, which have more white people. Black people have a different vernacular, they use different words, they have different pace of speaking. So I just feel like that's a survival thing. And Mike didn't feel like this was something he could choose to do or not in order to be successful. So social capital is the ability to use networks of people to provide support, including peers and other social networks. We found that participants could create spaces at a PWI where they could safely share resources and celebrate successes with other Black science majors. And something that was really interesting to us in our study is we learned about some groups of students that are not front-facing, meaning they don't have a web page, but they're very informal and sometimes virtual communities. For example, there are a number of group chats that the Black students on our campus are a part of, where they check out things like, is Julie Stanton an okay person to take cell biology from? And they share that information with one another. Or here's an opportunity to do a great research project with some other faculty member who provides a welcoming space for that. So John talked about something called BUGA, and I'll just tell you, UGA stands for University of Georgia, and BUGA stands for Black UGA. So it's just a sense of knowing you're a part of BUGA if you're a Black student at UGA, and what comes with that is just a family bond with the people here. They give you a lot of support. The people in it keep you going if you're struggling. And so in just a moment, I'm going to invite you to engage in doing your own practice in recognizing community cultural wealth by showing you some examples from our data. But I don't want to leave this part without saying, while the students in our study can use community cultural wealth to be successful, this requires them to spend time, energy, and attention that their white counterparts do not have to spend. So I just want to make sure that I mention that. And so these examples come from our data, and what I'm going to invite you to do in a moment is to read through them and think about which forms of capital that we talked about might be exemplified in the data. So there's two examples here. We'll give you about 3 minutes or so to read the examples, and you're welcome, if you like, to talk with someone nearby, or if you want to think about these on your own, please feel welcome to do that instead. So we'll give a little bit of time and then talk about each one together.
So after our content analysis, as you saw with the data, we did a thematic analysis. We're going to highlight a couple of major themes we saw in this study, and we're going to give ideas that most relevant to this larger theme. So the first major theme that we saw in our study was this theme of a deeper calling. This theme is captured best as Black science majors felt deeply called to careers in their science beyond their individual motivations. And as we saw in the previous scenario examples, the capitals we saw being utilized more are aspirational and vanilla capital. And specifically, these ideas of exactly with the air formulator, biochemistry major example of giving back to their communities of color, creating or surpassing family legacy, as well as helping other Black science majors persist in their individual majors. The second, I should say next, not in a particular order, the next major theme that we saw was this theme of using strengths to persist, which was Black science majors utilized their internal strengths to succeed in science despite those perceived barriers, as we spoke about earlier. And the capitals we saw here, again, aspirational capital, navigational, and resistance capital. And this theme had a couple of interesting quotes that participants spoke about in the data collection phase. There's this idea of, in quotes, they're just getting it done, right? Despite the enormous stress or perceived barrier the students face, that they felt that failure is not an option, that they felt that they have to succeed, not just for themselves, but for their family legacy. And so all these ideas are ideas that are saying that these students are felt the need to succeed beyond just their individual motivation. And then the next major theme we observed in our study was this larger theme of creating spaces for growth. This theme is captured best as these students utilized social capital to create those informal spaces and virtual spaces and informal communities, as was talked about earlier with Black UGA, where they can succeed at a PWI. And the themes that we saw, or I should say the capital we saw within this larger theme, is the theme of social and navigational capital. So exactly as I said, this creating of those virtual spaces and informal communities, as well as creating formal communities and participating in formal communities that had faculty student engagement, whether it be for research or for the academia, within and outside, within science and outside of their science. We also want to share this idea of what's a multiplier effect. This effect is seen best with this quote for David, and David says, "We all know each other, and we have this, I want to say, it's like a silent code. We all understand if you need help, come. Somebody will help you. Somebody's always willing to help you. I have people coming up to me asking questions about stuff. I honestly never talked to them for real before, but it's like, yeah, I got you." So this quote is a good example of when you are directly affecting and helping one student that's in your class, that student's network, that student's connections and strengths extend beyond just that one student. And so this theme of multiplier effect is really a ripple effect that extends beyond that one student. So in conclusion, we want to highlight again that the Black science majors that we studied at our institution utilized all forms of capital or community cultural wealth to succeed in their respective majors. They utilized unique strengths and creating their informal communities with and virtual spaces with each other that persisted them and helped them with the barriers that they were facing. So the question becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? And like it was said earlier, we'd like to highlight this. We'll discuss this more in detail in our workshop later this PM. But we want to also leave you guys with some final thoughts here for this seminar portion, which was, as we talked about earlier, PAR has an end goal, which is the goal of social change. And social change isn't a list of, isn't a checklist, as it says. It's not a list of things that we can do to say A, B, C, like a laundry list of completions, right? It requires a constant engagement and intentional thinking, right? To replace those implicit biases we've spoken about and replace them with conscious biases. So that's definitely part of this avoiding requires that continual learning piece for both for faculty and students. So I think that's the last content slide. We want to acknowledge members from our CCW research team in 2019, as well as UGA organization and our funding sources. I want to thank you for hosting us, and we would love to have any questions now or later. We can reach out by our content by our email handle, and then also the QR code on the right is our most recent 2021 paper that we would like to share with you guys as an additional resource. So thank you again.